everyone. This is ring announcer Thomas Triber. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the time has arrived for Inside Boxing Weekly. So here are your hosts, Mike Goodpaster, John Einreinhofer, and Jeremiah Preisser on the Grueling Truth Sports Network.
Welcome, everybody, to Inside Boxing Weekly, brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation and the Sheridan Report. Make sure you go check out Bobby Sheridan. If you're going to bet, you might as well have some inside information. And Friday on Survive in Advance, he picked Denny Hamlin to win the Daytona 500, which Denny Hamlin won today. So make sure you go check out the Sheridan Report. I'm your co-host for Inside Boxing Weekly, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I want to welcome in my two co-hosts. First up, Jeremiah Preisser. How you doing, Jeremiah?
Mike, John, let's talk some boxing, fellas.
All right, you already gave away the other co-host, but the other co-host, that's not a good introduction for him. All right, the former trainer of Kasan Bayasangurov, John Einreinhofer. How you doing, John?
I won't take responsibility for that one, but good to be here otherwise.
All right, so we're going to start off by talking about that fight, and it was for the WBA World Middleweight title, which right there tells you it's not a real middleweight championship. Rob Brant, solid fighter, but the competition's got to be better than this if you're fighting for a trinket, John.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're a main event on ESPN. I mean, Brant's a pretty good fighter. He did what he had to do in the fight. No criticism with his performance here, but by second off, he's only 21, but he wasn't very good. He hadn't fought anybody before this. And, you know, why he's on a main event on ESPN and then supposedly an alphabet title fight really didn't belong there. And not trying to be overly critical of him, but, you know, he's only 21, but just watching the fight, you didn't see any upside there. He can't punch. He didn't show that much. No reason to think that we'll see him make any kind of significant improvement from what we saw. But in the world of alphabet belts, that doesn't mean he won't be forced on us again sometime in the future. So I can't say we won't see him again.
All right. Jeremiah, what's your take on Rob Brant? What's the ceiling for him? I know he's eyeing a future bout with Canelo Alvarez, but what do you think the potential for Rob Brant is?
Well, I mean, I don't know. You know, 160 is pretty good right now. I mean, I can say a few things about his style. I mean, I do think his work rate is damn impressive for a middleweight. I mean, he's getting damn close to records and whatnot. I can't remember how many punches he threw in this fight, but I mean, I think in his last fight he threw like 1261 or something, which was something like 4 punches off the middleweight record mark. So, I mean, I like his work rate. He's got variety in his shots. I mean, his stamina is obviously very good because of it. And he seems like he's a pretty tough guy. But, of course, you know, I'd like to see him against a legitimate puncher before I start, you know, making, genuine assumptions about, you know, how tough he is, what his heart is like. But he's fun. I mean, we got to give him that. In terms of the Russian, he tried, making his stamp early. You know, he was counterpunching quickly. And I don't mean with fast hands. I mean, he was just trying to work as quickly off Brant's work as he could. And, you know, there were times when he landed a few, clear punches. Again, Brant has some defensive flaws, and I think those are going to be exposed by some of the better middleweights in the future. But like you guys said, I mean, he's really got to step up the competition, and it's hard to say. I mean, where exactly he goes from here. Everybody and their grandmother wants Canelo Alvarez, seeing as he does hold some secondary, bullshit alphabet trinket. It's always hard to say where the organization will actually take him, because we saw with Daniel Jacobs, they didn't force him or a lot of other guys to defend. Right, they don't really force the regular belt holder and the super belt holder to I don't even know what you call it, unify. It doesn't even make much sense to me. But to me, I don't know. Brant's probably just going to stick around the fringes for a little while and fight competition pretty similar to this, because I mean, with a guy of his skill, it's like, who do you throw him in against? So you throw him against Andrade? That's probably unlikely. Can Deverenchenko get a shot? I think that would be a pretty fun fight. Other than that, again, middleweight doesn't seem like it's strong in the back half, but the top half is pretty heavy right now. So I don't see him being a top-level guy, but he'll make some fun fights. And Deverenchenko, I think, is probably the funnest fight they can make at the moment.
All right.
Well, I think what'll probably happen, we'll just add with Brant, I think what'll probably happen is, like Jeremiah said, I mean, it's amazing all these guys at middleweight, they're just waiting on Canelo, and especially the guys signing with DAZN. But with that said, I figure Brant can probably get coaxed into fighting Murata again in Japan and get a lot of money for it. So I figure in reality that'll probably end up being his holy grail more than Canelo, because there's a line for Canelo, and he can get a big payday if he takes the chance of going to Japan and fighting Murata again. So I'm guessing that'll probably happen.
All right, next up, we moved to Los Angeles last night. John Molina lost a unanimous decision to Omar Figueroa. Number one, Molina looks like age is catching up to him pretty good, Jeremiah. And Omar Figueroa, I think the question has to be, considering the weight, how seriously he takes all this anyways.
Yeah, and it's a bit unfortunate because Figueroa does have some grit and he can grind you down. And at 135, like I noted in our other weekly show, I thought Figueroa was going to be a major player at 135. But it just seems like he really just doesn't take it seriously enough. I mean, the contracted weight was initially, I think, 140. I could be wrong there. I know it was closer to 140 than it was 147, but he missed weight by a significant amount, and I think that indicates his attitude towards the sport. And I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mean, Figueroa is a guy that I almost always root against because of his lack of dedication. I just can't stand to see guys consistently not only miss weight, because this isn't his first rodeo in that regard, but it's also frustrating to see his jump in weight. I mean, to me, he looks a little flabby at 147. And I really think that if he was dedicated and really trying to make his mark on the sport, he could be at 135. So, the way he is, I mean, I don't really want to see any top-level guy give him a defense. I hope that he's not on the radar of very many people. To me, he just hasn't earned it. I would much rather just see him stuck in back and forth battles like the Molina fights. I mean, I thought he won the Molina fight, but put him against the guy like Josecito Lopez or something. I think that would be pretty fun. Victor Ortiz, even Andre Berto at this point. There are fights to be made.
No.
I
don't see Andre Berto fight anybody.
Okay. Well, my point is that I just want him to be in fun fights, because that's about all the value he has to me. And I will make another note of, the fight itself, of course, again, it was fun, but the scorecards, I didn't see that. I mean, when it seemed like it took quite a while to tally them up, and, then they gave Figueroa this big decision. I didn't see it. Maybe I'd have to go back and watch it. I just didn't see it as like a 9-1 type fight. But yeah, that's my take on Molina.
All right. You mean Figueroa?
Yeah, Figueroa. Sorry, I haven't forgot his name.
Yeah, because I'd rather watch John Molina, even if he is getting up there in age, and
I would.
A whole lot left. All right. Do you see something, John, that Jeremiah doesn't?
Not really. I think Figueroa has talent, but unfortunately, there's just nothing more I can say that this was the out-of-shape version of Figueroa that showed up for this fight. He got the win. I thought it was a fight that could have gone either way. I don't have any problem with Figueroa getting the win, but I thought it was a pretty close fight. I thought you could even make a case for Molina having won the fight. But, Figueroa showed flashes of his talent here and there, and there's no doubt he's got a good chin, because Molina, even at 36 years old, he could still bang hard, and he was catching Figueroa with a lot of good right hands. But this was the Figueroa, the out-of-shape Figueroa we saw against DeMarco, who got off to a quick start, and then he was so gassed in the second half of the fight he took a lot of unnecessary punishment and let DeMarco almost pull it out. And I think that's a lot of why he was off. They say injuries, but I think it was really, he took so many shots against DeMarco. I think he really jeopardized his future, and he was off then. Then he was supposed to fight Broner, and he got the DUI, and that fight fell through. So, you can look at the circumstantial evidence, and it would seem to indicate that, he drank too much. I mean, you got these coming in out of shape, and with DeMarco, I think with the DeMarco fight, he weighed 152 pounds. That was what he weighed in at. And, here he weighed in at like 145. It was supposed to be 140. I don't know why. I think if an in-shape Figueroa probably could fight at welterweight, even if arguably it's not his best weight. And
now, let me ask you something real quick.
Make 140, I don't get it.
John. Let me ask you something. He comes in at 145, supposed to be 140. Did they fine him anything?
I think Molina Camp got money on this one. I think I'm not certain about that. I'd have to check, but I think that's what they did on this one. That's a lot of times what they'll do. He gets compensated to still go forward with it at basically what some portion of what Figueroa was going to get. So I think I'm not certain. I'd have to go check, but I think he may have had to give Molina some incentive there to go forward. But he was out of shape, and Molina's shown his age a little bit, but Figueroa, I mean, Molina really doesn't have a great chin. He's been in some great wars, but he really doesn't take the greatest shot in the world. And why I say that is, I think an in-shape Figueroa could have stopped him. There was some times when Figueroa was showing flashes of his abilities and getting some good right hands in there, but he couldn't follow up because he wasn't really in condition to. And, everybody or a lot of people were talking about, like, as Jeremiah did, you could visibly see he looked out of shape. And in this case, that was the reality. So, he was in with an older Molina. He was able to get the W, but I don't like to see him coming out of shape like this. Ironically, even though Robert Guerrero was shot, I think if you looked when he fought Robert Guerrero, he was in shape for Robert Guerrero. And you saw the combinations. He was the first and only guy to blow away Guerrero like that. And, he was in shape. You could see it in the hand speed. You could see it in the combinations. But, that's not the Figueroa we're seeing all the time now. And I think even if he was going to fight at welterweight, if he came in like that, he could be somewhat of a factor. He wouldn't be a factor to take over the top, but I think he could do something. But, he's getting around 30 years old now, and, he's just kind of running out of time with these performances when he's not in shape, and that makes his future questionable.
All right, John. And then we've got the main event, Leo Santa Cruz, Rafael Rivera. It was pretty much exactly what we thought, I think. Yeah, I agree. That was a no surprise one. Santa Cruz throws a lot of punches. He has talent, but he can't bang, and it leads some inferior opposition to go the distance with him. And some people were saying after the fight that, well, Rivera, he was tough and he brought something. And I'm not really knocking Rivera. He went the distance, but that was not a particularly talented guy in there. So there was no suspense there. And, Santa Cruz is a big favorite, but couldn't get him out of there because of his lack of punching power. So wasn't a particularly exciting or anything surprising going on there in the main event. But I didn't think Rivera brought anything special. So this was kind of a miss as a main event there. And the preliminary number today I saw was 1.2 million. That'll have to get confirmed earlier in the week. Well, as the week goes on, the beginning of the week. But those were good numbers when PBC was doing the time buy, and Al Heyman was getting his guys seen by a lot more people than were on premium cable, which that was the competition at the time. Now, the landscape's changed a little bit. These guys are still getting seen by many more people than would have seen them on premium cable, but now Fox paying out that money,
rights fees, some of these numbers are not going to be that good if they continue. And same, frankly, with some of the ESPN fights. So I think there's some, like it or not, there's some concern for boxing there.
All right, Jeremiah.
Yeah, and as a boxing fan, sometimes I'm conflicted. I mean, do you guys ever get cynical to the point where you're like, you know what, forget it, let it tank? Sometimes I'm in that camp where I'm like, if you're going to keep giving us crap matchups, you kind of deserve what you get, right? You're sowing your own seeds. But yeah, I mean, it is much like we expected. I mean, Rivera was game. He was tough. He had some sharpness to some of his punches, and he did land some punches. But you look at some of the highlights of the fight, and Rivera was, especially with a little back and forth action, they're both really just missing. But I mean, I was sort of happy with Santa Cruz's approach. He didn't just box. He could have made the fight a bit easier on himself and done that. But he won clearly. I mean, it salvaged the main event a little bit that Rivera was game and that Santa Cruz didn't just box. So I can say that much. But again, when you're putting on these main events, if you do bad numbers, it's hard for me to feel bad. It's just one of those things. Like, there's no need for Gary Russell or Leo Santa Cruz. That's who's on my mind. There's no need for Santa Cruz to take on this caliber opposition, and not only take on this caliber opposition consistently. I mean, when you look at Santa Cruz's resume, yeah, the Frampton fights were fun, and I was talking about two top-level guys there, but you also gloss over Santa Cruz's resume, and there's just too many guys like this, that just don't really belong.
It's pretty much all guys like this.
Yeah, I mean, it is, and it's pathetic because I like Santa Cruz as a fighter. Again, I think he's fun. I think he proved in the rematch with Frampton that he's more versatile than a lot of us thought. But I've had big problems, and again, I think it's pathetic that we allow this, as a sport, that Santa Cruz is something like a three division titleist. People would conflate that with the word champion, but he's a 3-division titleist, and who has he really beaten? I mean, he's not even a consistent mainstay on pound for pound lists. I mean, what does that tell you about the sport? And he has one loss, So it's just it's tiresome watching this sort of stuff time and time again. Yeah, Rivera was game. Yeah, it was all right, but he easily could have been fighting Gary Russell Jr. in this slot. There's no reason he didn't have to, and it seems as if they're going to make that fight, or at least there was some chatter about it afterwards. And that's really what they should be doing. I mean, after all these years spent fighting guys like Rivera, we could have already had a Gary Russell fight. We could have already had the trilogy with Frampton. Instead, we get an unnecessary rematch with Abner Mares. I mean, it's baloney, But hopefully we get the Gary Russell Jr. fight. I think that would indicate who the best featherweight in the world is. I guess we'll see, if that pans out and we get something we really want as fans. I don't think Santa Cruz is opposed to getting that fight. I don't know. Maybe it's just him and Al being, so tight with one another that, he's getting a lot of soft touches and getting paid pretty well for his time. But, he's got to step it up, and Gary Russell has to be next.
All right, let's go.
Yeah, sorry, Mike, just want to add something because Jeremiah, it's a good time for me to jump in there because he hit on something that I was thinking about going into our show here tonight. I'm looking at the UFC card tonight, and all the preliminary matchups, the odds are all close. Like the favorites minus 150, the underdogs plus 125, and we've got Santa Cruz is a minus 5,000 over Rivera in the main event. You got Brant with this Bangsaroff guy. You got DAZN just throwing all kinds of garbage cards on before we're even going to get close to the Canelo Jacobs. I mean, this is where you're getting these ratings discrepancies. I mean, you can't have these cards, that boxing showing on basic cable, broadcast TV, where you've got these lopsided matchups, and expect that people are going to keep tuning in, except real hardcore people that will anyway. It's just the recipe it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's kind of is simple, but we're not getting it. you got to get back to just putting some competitive fights on TV. You can't keep showing these fights with heavy favorites and put it out time and time again. You got Darrell fighting this Yildirim guy that Eubank Jr. took out that Saturday night on FS1. And like I said, the zone cards have been mostly awful. They got this Canaceo win last week, but that was just a fluke. Let's face it. Sure, that's why we watch and to get a surprise, but you have to watch 50 times the minus 5,000 favorite wins before you get something like that. Canaceo fight last week.
All right, so let's go ahead and get into this. Anthony Darrell is fighting Advani Yildirim, who you said got beat by Chris Eubank. This is for the vacant WBC super middleweight title, which tells you that this belt means absolutely nothing. So to get a shot at a vacant title, Jeremiah, what did Yildirim have to do?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't think. Yeah, I'm trying, man. I'm really, kind of, I'm getting hot like a tea kettle here tonight. I'm not sure what it is. I'm just feeling it, But I really don't think it's so much what Yildirim did as it is what Chris Eubank Jr. didn't do. So to give people some backstory on this story, apparently Chris Eubank Jr. was disrespectful to either the WBC or Jose Suleiman, and so they took him out of the rankings altogether. And then somehow, right, I mean, it's not really all that confusing when you follow, the alphabet trinkets in there. This is Al Heyman. This is Al Heyman trying to get Darrell a trinket, right? That's all it is, and they put him against somebody who's serviceable, and Yildirim is not a bad fighter. I mean, he did beat Mock, in his last fight, which Mock is a pretty good fighter. He's on a winning streak, but
that's a majority decision that could have won either way, though.
Right. Yeah, I don't think Yildirim's really too good. I mean, I
don't either. I agree with John. Third time I've ever said that.
I mean, he just can't. He just can't fight because Eubank, Eubank Jr. We'll be talking about him coming up, but he showed against Groves. I'm sorry, he just showed he can't fight particularly well on the high world class level. I mean, the skill level's just not there, and he blew away Yildirim. And that's not a good endorsement of it. And I agree with Jeremiah. I mean, that's why Heyman and PBC started working with the WBC, just like Hearn's doing all this WBA stuff, and Aaron with the WBO. So, this is Darrell's chance to get this WBC belt, and Yildirim's the victim here. But we don't need that for an FS1 main event.
Yeah, no, we don't. I mean,
hey, did you see Yildirim's attempt to beat Chris Eubank, Jeremiah?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, it's not as if it wasn't. I mean, I don't remember it being a blowout until the stoppage. Well, maybe it was. I don't know. Now I'm fuzzy.
Blowout. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Do you remember it, John? But it seemed like I watched that fight wondering why in the hell I'm watching this fight.
He didn't last very long.
Well, it was a third-round stoppage. I mean, and Eubank isn't really a puncher either. I mean, it shows you what sort of level we're dealing with Yildirim. I do think my definition for good is a bit more flexible, but what it is it's Al Heyman maneuvering his guy into title shot, and something that's pretty easy. Again, I don't know if initially they planned on Eubank fighting Darrell for this title. I don't know. Again, just from what I've heard of what went on, before this fight ever got made, was Eubank apparently disrespecting the organization, and so they removed him altogether, and now we're stuck with this. I mean, and then Darrell, he wins this fight. Hopefully, he doesn't actually, but I don't have a guy in this race, but it's one of those things like, okay, so Darrell wins, and then what? We got to deal with one or two soft touches before, he fights, I don't know, Benavidez or something. It's just, man, it's nonsense. It's nonsense.
Maybe he'll just fight Eubank. That way we can get another bad fight.
It's nonsense.
All right. Speaking of nonsense, on DAZN Saturday night, Brandon Rios is going to fight Humberto Soto, and I'm not kidding. Let's see. Soto lost Antonio Orozco in 2015. Since then, he has beaten 3 fighters with a total of 48 losses, but they've won like 70 fights. Rios and Soto. I mean, this is a solid fight in 2012, John.
Yeah, I mean, think of the zone feeding this. I mean, this is worse than the other stuff we've even talked about already, and it's not even close.
I don't know if it's worse than Durrell and Yildirim because they're claiming that it's a world title fight. At least they don't claim it's a world title fight.
Yeah, I mean, but I saw a WBA super middleweight gold title fight on ESPN Plus Friday night. So everything's some kind of a title fight now.
Well, I think this is for
somehow
the WBC Intercontinental Regular Tijuana Championship.
I mean,
Are you being serious?
Wait a
I'm
second.
serious
Yes,
right now.
and this
That's
is
how
the
bad it
thing.
is.
This is the thing. The winner will defend the champion of Tijuana against Pablo Baez.
And Baez would only be a slight underdog. I mean, you know, that's what point we've reached. I know that the more the 3 of us are talking about this out loud, we know why there's struggles in boxing.
Yeah, it didn't
with
seem
some
as
of this stuff
stupid
right
when
now
I just read the list of fights before we did the show.
No, you put it into perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in perspective now. It's just this stuff is really bad. It's really bad. It's just not. You know, it shouldn't be TV stuff. These fights should be buried on undercards.
This should be on like Spike
these are
TV.
not the main event fight. Yeah, I mean these should be like the secondary fights at best. You know, not the main events. That it's just not good. You know, Rios. I mean, you know, Rios. He got stopped by Garcia. Got stopped by Bradley. I mean, Bradley doesn't stop anybody, even though he was a good fighter. It's just awful.
Okay, Jeremiah, you want to take a shot at this one?
Hey, that's.
I
that's
still think 6 years ago this is a solid matchup.
No, I think you're absolutely right. You know, actually, that was a worthwhile transition you did there. You're like, okay, all right. Well, so I actually think you're right. I mean, if these guys were at lightweight, this would be a hell of a scrap if they were both in their prime because they were, you know, exciting. I mean, I like Soto when he was at his best. I mean, he's a guy who
them both. They were both entertaining to watch, but that's no longer true. And maybe they'll stand there and slug it out, but it's still a stupid fight.
Yeah, no, it's dumb.
I'll admit when Brandon Rios was a lightweight, heck, I'll say it now. I'll admit it now. I mean, you know, I thought when he was at lightweight and in good shape, I mean, I thought, you know, it might not be a real long career, but I thought he was going to have a good career, and it just didn't happen. But I liked him a lot at that point.
Yeah, he was kind of. I think he was kind of at a Figueroa moment where he was probably eating too much or drinking too much, or he was having one of those. But I should note, I mean, just because the fight is not really of much relevance, there was a point. Remember when Brandon Rios was at 135, and he was, you know, he was bigger than a lot of guys, and he had pretty good punching power, and you know, he has a granite chin, even though he's been stopped. You know, at welterweight, he does have a really good chin. But remember when Richard Abril, the Cuban, gave him a boxing lesson and then he got screwed over by the judges? Yeah. Well, anyways, you know that. Yeah. Right.
I don't know. I'm just kind of zoned out, wondering why I'm talking about Brandon Rios and Humberto Soto. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, again,
I do remember that though.
Yeah, no, I think like John said, this would be a good supplementary fight. I mean, if you had, you know, a solid main event, like if you had, you know, Keith Thurman.
This is, if you had a decent main event on a network television, this would be a good first fight because you know they're both going to come to fight.
Exactly. Yeah, again, I mean, if you had a good main event, like, I don't know, Thurman Spence Jr. or something, and then you had a decent fight before, you know, this before that, that's fine. I mean, these are good fights. These are adequate fights to make at this juncture in time.
Just not as a main event on DAZN.
Exactly. So Who wins here? I don't know. I'm rooting for Soto. I don't know who wins. Probably Rios. He's the bigger guy.
I don't care.
Yeah.
Next up, Lee Selby will take on Omar Douglas. Selby, of course, coming off his upset loss to Josh Warrington. Omar Douglas, decent fighter. He's got 2 losses, but they were both acceptable losses. Lost decisions to Edner Cherry, Javier Fortuna. What do you think here, Jeremiah?
Well, I mean, I think this is Selby's introduction to 135, and I think that he's not going to make it at 135. I mean, I do think Selby has good ability. He's a good boxer. He's got a nice jab and whatnot. But for me, Selby kind of strikes me as not a guy who's going to make it in higher divisions. To me, he seems better suited at 126. And I'm not saying, he's saying that he can't make the weight anymore. And I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm not denying that at all. My thing is, when you're a pure boxer like he is, weight is even more. A lot of times, it's more of an essential function, than if you're big. Selby just doesn't seem like that guy who's going to transition that well into 135. But to his credit, there are, if he gets by Douglas, and I don't think that's a given actually, but if he gets by, there are a number of, interesting fights he can make, at least at the domestic level. It would be nice not to get Krolla Lomachenko, but, if Krolla loses, maybe you get Selby Krolla, maybe you can get Selby Campbell. There are some guys lingering around who they can make fight, but I am favoring Selby to win a decision here. I just think it'll be a little tougher than some people expect. Maybe the British fans. Douglas is a serviceable guy. He does have some skill, and he's a tough guy as well. He's got a little craft, but again, he's not an operator at the world class level. I don't know. Just to me, Selby doesn't seem like he's going to fit that well into 135, but we'll see.
All right, John.
I actually kind of like this fight. Now, we've talked about what we didn't like, but for an undercard fight, I actually kind of like this one. For Selby, saying he's going to campaign at 135 now, not an easy fight. I'm surprised how big of a favorite Selby is. Maybe they're looking at the fact of it being over at the UK, but I think style-wise, when you look at that Selby, who I did like his boxing skill through a lot of his career. He's always been weak in the punching power department, but he just got steamrolled by Warrington. He didn't get anything going, and that's at 126 pounds. Omar Douglas is very aggressive, comes forward, has pretty good punching power, and like Jeremiah said, he does have some boxing skill. He's not an unskilled guy. He dropped Fortuna and was winning that fight, but he just faded a little bit in the second half of the fight. And then Edner Cherry is a veteran who's been in with some good guys, and he was just a little too slick for him. That's his second loss, and I think the Selby camp and the matchmakers are probably looking at that and thinking that Selby can outbox him. But Cherry'd been fighting at that weight, and he's a stronger guy than Selby. And I think that Douglas might be able to. At this weight, do a Warrington type of a thing. He doesn't throw as many punches as Warrington, but he's got more power and he's stronger. So, to me, it's an interesting fight. There's an upset potential here, but the odds makers have Selby a big favorite. So we'll see if that's warranted or not. But I think it's a pretty good style matchup.
I would add just real quickly that Omar Douglas actually did. In his last outing, he did beat a guy who's a pretty good pure boxer in Lydell Rhodes. So I think stylistically, he may be sort of accustomed to what Lee Selby's going to bring. And so I think that's another interesting dynamic, and I think it's going to be tougher than expected.
All right, next up, Joe Joyce against Berman-Stiverne. Berman-Stiverne, of course, in the last 4 years has fought once, where he basically laid down as quickly as possible. I'm not a big fan of Joe Joyce. I think the first live guy he fights kicks his ass. What do you think, Jeremiah? And this is not that live guy, by the way.
Well, I think Stiverne's gonna be bludgeoned. I mean, Stiverne, when you saw him, the shape that he showed up against Deontay Wilder in the rematch. It had the appearance, before the bell even sounded, that he wasn't going to go the distance.
He was there to get paid.
Yeah, exactly, and I think he's here to get paid this time as well. I'm not saying they're fixing the fight, but Stiverne just at this stage, we've seen this. How often throughout heavyweight history have we seen guys like this? Guys who they look talented when they're actually in shape, and then they can collect nice paydays. It seems like it happens more at heavyweight than anywhere else, that you can be a fat slob or something, and even though you exhibited some skill in the past, you can still collect these sort of paydays because there's a bunch of guys coming up trying to make a name for themselves, or soft touches that they're trying to fit in or whatnot. It just strikes me as Joyce is going to beat him up. I mean, if Stiverne actually showed up motivated, I think it would be an interesting fight.
I don't know if it would then, because he hasn't been motivated in like 5 years. So
right,
the last motivated fight he had was probably against Deontay Wilder. I mean, he made a good showing for his level of skill. I mean, if you look at it, he beat nobody to get a heavyweight title shot, and he wins the heavyweight title, or a portion of it, by beating Chris Arreola. Beats Arreola again. And then over the last 5 years, he's fought 3 times. He's got 1 win and 2 fights against Wilder. And like I said, the Wilder thing, the first fight, if he was coming off that fight, I would say, well, Joe Joyce is stepping up. But that's not the case, and Joe Joyce isn't stepping up here.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm assuming that Stiverne is going to show up unmotivated. And
put it like this: Lenroy Thomas would kick Berman Stiverne's ass right now.
Yeah, got to start bringing back some of these old guys, right? Like calling in the relief. Like we're looking into the bullpen or something.
Well, it's what the heavyweight division's always done, though.
Yeah, it is. Well, it is. And that's why I'm saying Stiverne, Charles Martin, he's going to get another shot. I mean, they recycle these guys a lot, and Stiverne, again, I think in his best, at his best, he did have pretty quick hands. His power was pretty good. His combinations are pretty good, but he's not that guy anymore. And so Joyce, to me, even if you see a bit of flashes from Stiverne early, I just think he's going to wear Stiverne down and probably stop him in the mid-rounds.
All right. John, do you agree or disagree?
Well, just maybe a slight, not really a disagreement, but just I see some things the same, some things a little different. I kind of like him. Joyce is kind of ponderous, but I like some things I've seen about him so far. His size, he's got that bludgeoning power. He's the type of guy I don't think he'll be at the ever get to the legit very top of the division, but I think he's got the chance to be a guy in the bottom half of the top 10 legitimately that gets in some good, exciting type fights. For me, Stiverne, I agree with Jeremiah that, earlier in his career, he had good offensive skills, power. At that point, his chin had looked pretty solid, except for that one time he got stopped earlier in his career. But
he
in other
didn't
fights,
fight
it
anybody
was
either,
solid.
in his defense. Ever.
Yeah, sorry, y'all. He didn't have the most stellar resume, but I thought that for me, I just thought that he took too much punishment in the first fight against Wilder. I thought, and I said it at the time, I didn't think he was going to be the same after that. He went to the hospital after the fight, and he hasn't been. And I just think the guy's a shell. Now, I'm not disputing he was completely out of shape for the second Wilder fight, but I think he's a shell. I don't think he's had anything since the first Wilder fight. I think he got damaged, and I just think this is going to be a massacre. I just think Joyce is going to blast him out of there. I'd be surprised if Stiverne sees the end of the second round. And I just think this is pointless, like Jeremiah is saying. I don't see the point of this one. I know Joyce hasn't had that many fights, but for his step up, we could do something better than this. I just think Stiverne's got absolutely nothing left. And I just don't see what this is going to prove. And I think that Joyce might even get him out in the first round. I could see this one ending in 1.
All right. I tend to agree more with John here because Stiverne never was any good, John. But John needs to say he was to defend Deontay Wilder. Next up,
I thought he was pretty good.
Come on. How could you think somebody who only significant fights were against Chris Arreola was good?
Because that's what the heavyweight division at that point was so thin. So I think now it's getting pretty good myself.
Yeah,
but
we got
it
a
was
bunch
so
of mediocre
thin, man,
guys.
It was so thin then. I think now it's filling out. I think this will end up going down as a good era.
You know what? Berman-Stiverne in his prime would have been bitch slapped by Joe Parker.
No.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I'm not. Parker's a guy that is legit top 10, but he's not one of the guys I'm higher on. That's
me
in the
neither.
division, I think.
But what I'm telling you is this: he would have beat that Stiverne because that Stiverne sucked ass. Jeremiah, am I wrong here?
Hold on, what Stiverne does he beat? He beats the first Wilder one?
Stiverne, what the hell? I mean, the only thing he ever beat was Chris Arreola, whose tits were bigger than half supermodels in the world.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm kind of like you, Mike. I don't really think too much in any of these guys, but I do think, as John says, I do think it is.
Fight with a hairnet. What the hell is that all about?
I don't know. They need to cut it like they did in that Paulie Malignaggi fight. You remember that when he fought who's it, Lovemore Endo, and he was wearing that fake hair, and they actually had to cut it because it was so bothersome.
Yeah,
but
I mean, come on, he sucks. Let's move on. We should never talk about Berman-Stiverne this long. Ever. Not even if he's fighting Shannon the Cannon Briggs. Next up, which might be mildly entertaining, Chris Eubank Jr., James DeGale. This is the one fight I'm looking forward to this weekend. And I'm looking forward to it, hoping that James DeGale shuts Chris Eubank Jr. up. I know you're not impressed with Eubank Jr., John, but I also know that we both think James DeGale has dropped off a significant amount over the last few years. Has he dropped off enough so Chris Eubank can beat him?
That's what I've been trying to figure out, Mike. I like this fight like other people because it's an even matchup, but I think some people see it like you're alluding to, but some don't. I mean, I don't think either of these guys at this point. I think DeGale
used to be good.
Guy.
I mean, you got to give him that.
Yeah,
I mean, he's got enough quality wins here that, you know.
And he's proved to me he had some heart and skill during his career, DeGale. So he's provided some entertaining fights, shown me some good things. I think he's shocked. I think then you have Eubank, to me, has proved to me against Groves, and I know it's one fight, but it's just enough. And you saw that Groves just got blasted out of there by Callum Smith. I just don't think Eubank's very good. So this is very hard to call because I've got a James DeGale who, if James DeGale wasn't shot, if this was the James
DeGale would kick his ass if he was in his prime.
Right. I'm going to say that. I mean, if this was the James DeGale who, fought Durrell, right? If this was even the James DeGale of not too long ago, who
Badou Jack
was, I was going to say he was lined up for the opening bell of the Badou Jack fight when they both gave each other a lot of punishment, that DeGale takes Eubank. So I've got to figure now, I'm looking at it, can the DeGale who barely got by Truax in the rematch, is that enough to get by Eubank? I've grappled with this one since they signed it, and I've decided yes. I think that DeGale is going to be just barely, and I'd have to say barely on this one because it's going to be close, but I think that DeGale might be just enough to slip by Eubank. It's a tough one to call, but I just don't think Eubank brings much.
I can tell you this. I tend to agree with you on this one, John, which is the fourth time we've ever done that before. And the reason is this. You said it. This is what I know. I know James DeGale is going to put forth his best effort. I know when shit gets tough, James DeGale, unless he's just totally shot, is going to come back and fight harder. I am not convinced Chris Eubank Jr. is like that, Jeremiah.
Yeah, I mean, with all the hype that his father's given him over the years, you would think that, again,
do you think that his father will come out to, his own song right before his son comes out like he did that one fight a few fights ago? That was embarrassing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, so this is a guy in senior who said that his son was going to be better than Floyd Mayweather. So I
said now. I mean,
yeah, but you know what? Chris Eubank Sr. thinks he was better than Floyd Mayweather. So,
right. Well, I'm not even. Well, he's embarrassed himself enough, to where he hasn't earned a walkout by himself. I mean, a lot of Brits liked him. The 90s was a bit of a golden era for them when they had Watson and Ben with them, but he just hasn't earned all that. And you would think that Chris Eubank Jr. would actually be affected mentally because he was put on such a high pedestal and he flatlined, at the world stage. So I think I lean with you guys where I think DeGale, if he can stay on his bicycle, if he can box, I think he's better off moving, sticking, being smart with his combinations, and again, just lateral movement consistently. Because I think we're quite clear now that Eubank Jr. is not a guy who's going to cut off the ring effectively, not a guy who's going to stick his jab in your face consistently unless you stand there. And so that sort of stuff confuses him, and he just he has a hard time landing combinations and gets sloppy. So I'm thinking that DeGale can box sharply enough to earn the decision here. But again, I'm like you guys. It's a close fight. I wouldn't be surprised to see Eubank Jr. win, but I'm favoring DeGale just slightly.
All right. Any other boxing news you guys want to talk about?
I don't have anything, to be honest with you. I mean, I was looking at the news, trying to think about what we haven't talked about on the Daily Show. We talk, the Povetkin-Usyk thing seems like it's gaining more traction, but I really haven't seen anything in the news that gives me any hope at all.
Yeah, there's nothing. It's kind of interesting. There's nothing. Right. Like, even though, you can only go so far advanced, but in boxing, the fights get signed so far out, usually you would be going a little farther out. Yeah, there's nothing like set or even really rumored past May. It's kind of bizarre. These things we'd all like to see and stuff, and there's nothing really getting kicked around, past May, and we're already at February 17th as we're doing this podcast tonight. So a little bit troubling that nothing's getting set for the horizon, except for, like Jeremiah said, Usyk and Povetkin. I figured that would be Usyk's heavyweight debut. I think that'll happen. I don't think I'll have any problem there, but we'd like to see some other good fights getting talked about here for the second half of the year as we get into the summer.
Yeah, I would say that the only thing that I've noticed lately, and I talked about this on Facebook, was it was some sizable channel who was giving Manny Pacquiao's son some attention, and they're like, oh, the typical stuff, he's trying to follow in his father's footsteps and this and that. I mean, the kid looks like a damn amateur, and I don't mean that positively. I don't mean, hey, he's fighting in the amateur ranks and he's got a lot of progressing to do. I mean, he just doesn't look like he can fight. And this is a consistent theme in boxing history, that legends who have sons who turn to the sport of boxing do not follow in their father's footsteps. I mean, this is again, it's a consistent. Julio Cesar Chavez Jr.'s been a disappointment, right? You had Jack Britton and his son, Marcel Cerdan and his
Chris
son.
Eubank Jr.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's actually what kind of sparked the initial thought there. Because, I was like, okay, well, Chris Eubank Jr. And then we had Manny Pacquiao. I don't even know what his name is, and I don't really care, to be honest with you. But, it's just a theme. I think Roberto Duran has does he have a son or a nephew who's competing?
Yeah,
He's got a son supposedly fights, but
he did fight. I saw he fought on.
Yeah.
I think it was a Top Rank card where they show all the fights, and he was the opening fight. It was his debut fight, because I think I was talking to Jeremiah or you when I was watching it, and they had him fight like a midget that couldn't see and didn't have any arms, and he took him out. So, but Roberto Duran Jr. is just that. He's junior. Senior was the better fighter.
Yeah, and it's just always it's like that. It's the guys who didn't turn out so good or had some talent, where their sons can be molded and shaped it into something better. But this, Manny Pacquiao's son, he's trying to make a mark. And Ricky Hatton has a son who's a boxer too. I'm not sure if he's a professional. I don't really follow his career closely because I saw him hit the mitts a few times. And
Well, you know what? That would show that there is more than just one Ricky Hatton.
yeah, well, this unfortunately there's not going to be two Ricky Hattons. Well, but if you're trying to make money, I mean, if you say you're Manny Pacquiao or you're Ricky Hatton, and your sons are not, you're objective about their potential, and like, well, they're continuing to do it. So what can I do? Just build them into something where you could put Ricky Hatton Jr. or whatever his name is. It's not Ricky, but God, I can't remember what his name is. But put Ricky Hatton Jr. against Manny Pacquiao Jr. Right, and throw it on a Manny Pacquiao card or something. There are ways, I guess, to milk this.
I'd watch that.
Yeah, I would too. Again, there's ways to maximize this, right? To go put him, right? Roberto Duran Jr. versus, I don't know. There.
Hey,
tons
I
of
have
guys.
boxing news that just dawned on me that I saw earlier today, and it was very distressing.
Hit us with it.
All right, Manuel Char and Freza Kendo for the legitimate heavyweight championship of the world has once again been postponed.
The horror.
I know.
The horror.
I've wanted to see that
shot.
fight for the last 8 years. It's been announced 37 times. It's been postponed 37 times. Nobody knows why on any of those occasions. But I just wish they'd quit, having Manuel Char keep the lineal heavyweight championship of the world held hostage like this.
Yeah, somebody's got to do something. Somebody's got to say something. This is preposterous.
I think Chris Eubank Jr. could beat Manuel Char.
I think Vanes Martirosyan could.
You never know. All right. Anybody got anything else? So we're going to wrap up our shortest Inside Boxing Weekly in the history of Inside Boxing Weekly.
No, that's just about it. Except we got to see how these TV ratings go.
We already know how they're going. They're not going to be that good.
No, they're not going to be good. Spence Garcia pay-per-view, Fox's promo, and heavy. It's going to be Fox's first pay-per-view.
Yeah, but Spence Garcia is a fight I want to see either way, and I'll pay to see that because
I want to see it.
I think Garcia, pound for pound, are one of the top 3 or 5 guys there is, and I think Spence could be. We just don't know for sure yet, but we're going to find out that night.
Yeah, it's 2 real fighters.
Yeah,
are going to be fighting each other.
Yeah,
so,
you've got a guy that is close to being great, and another guy that looks like he could be. So.
Right, so we'll see how that. I mean, maybe the build-up will work. I mean, it's 2 real fighters, so. But that's just about a month away from today. So
yeah, I think it's March 16th, isn't it?
Yeah, so boxing's going to. It's probably the way I see it coming with some of these poor ratings from all the platforms and promoters recently. I think the spotlight's on that fight coming up just about a month from today. That even though that's the pay-per-view one, it's going to have to do well. Or everybody's going to be back.
Hopefully, it will be an entertaining fight. I'm not even worried about the sales, but if you only have 200,000 buy it, but you give them a great fight, that can lead into the next week. Oh, there's a fight on Fox or something on free TV or ESPN. I'm going to watch that because of how great it was watching Spence and Garcia.
Yeah, that can happen. At least some buzz. So especially with Fox behind it. So. We'll have to we'll see that in about 4 weeks or so, I guess.
All right, I saw Creed 2 finally. Did anybody see Creed 2 yet?
I did see it. Yeah,
what do you think?
Came out. I didn't think it was that good.
I thought it was all right. The first Creed was better.
Yeah, most people liked it, but yeah, I thought the first Creed was a lot better.
I didn't say I liked it. I said it was all right. So Jeremiah doesn't watch TV. I don't know how he watches boxing because he doesn't have TV.
Well, yeah, I have my sources.
You're the problem with people in this country now. I mean, how can you learn anything if you don't watch TV? Am I right here, John? John passed the bar exam while watching LA Law. Correct, John?
Well, you wouldn't even get to know what the A team is or anything like that.
I know, but he's too old to know what the A team, or too young to know what the A team is.
Well, I mean, those reruns. You got to watch those. You got to learn them for reruns.
Yeah, but the one thing I've learned is shows that I watched when I was younger are even dumber now.
That's for sure.
I liked
it is a
BJ
little
and the
rough
Bear
sometimes.
when I was 9, but I watch it now and I'm thinking, what the hell? Sure, the monkey's cute, but I mean, the rest of the show sucks. Dukes of Hazzard, same thing, stupid show. But I think I was mesmerized by Daisy Duke's ass, so that all happened too. But we're going to go ahead and wrap the show up. I want to remind people tomorrow night, Inside Boxing Daily with me and Jeremiah. I think one of the topics tomorrow night should be something you had an argument with on Facebook this past weekend on whether Alexander Usyk was a better cruiser, or is the greatest cruiserweight of all time over Evander Holyfield.
Let's do it, man. I will say that I'm not bragging at all, believe me, but I did, see, it did seem like I sealed the deal on that argument. I haven't had a rebuttal yet, so I'm feeling good about this show.
So that's when you phoned a friend.
Your European ratings will be very high for that show.
Well, Jeremiah did use the phone a friend line, though.
I did.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it was really about Dwight Muhammad Qawi and how he's looked at before the first Holyfield fight. But I mean, but the thing is, we acknowledge that these guys fought each other. I mean, again, as we were talking about Rocky,
Holyfield would beat his ass half to death if you put him in the Omni Atlanta, an 80-degree heat in a 15-round fight. We'll see how tough Usyk is then. What do you think, John?
I would have to agree with that. I mean, all you got to do is look at Holyfield. Qawi won, which is one of the best fights really I've ever seen, and it was over 15 rounds.
It is the most underrated fight because nobody brings it up when they talk about the greatest fights of all time.
And then what the argument I think that people always make that doesn't make sense, and these are, to me, boxing people that should know better. Like I would say in that argument, well, Evander Holyfield became, lineal heavyweight champion of the world, and was in many great heavyweight fights after that. And they'll go, no, I'm talking about cruiserweight. We can't bring that into the discussion. Of course, you can bring it into the discussion for how.
I'm sorry, even if you don't bring it into the discussion, and I'm going to end it at this, so we don't give too much away. But I think Carlos De Leon would have beat the hell out of Murat Gassiev or Martin Briedis. De Leon was a good fighter. And when you look at his resume, he beat some really good fighters. Gassiev and Briedis are just decent guys. I'm sorry. Everybody just inflates everybody too much nowadays. And I'm sure I inflate everybody that was old too much these days. But I like Carlos De Leon. And Marvin Camel, who was on the show last week. And we did good numbers with that. So make sure you check out the Boxing Legends show with Marvin Camel. We're going to wrap the show up. And I want to remind everybody to go like us, comment, do whatever you got to do on iTunes and any other social media, any other platform that you hear us on. Make sure you comment. Make sure you help us to make the show better. And you can hear all of our stuff on iTunes, YouTube, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for John Einreinhofer, Jeremiah Preisser, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.